Go. Liberal hegemony is all about remaking the world in America's image. That has three dimensions to it. When the Cold War ended, the United States adopted a foreign policy called liberal hegemony. And the basic goal of that foreign policy was to remake the world in America's image. That policy was a colossal failure. And it's one of the principal reasons that Donald Trump ran hook, line, and sinker against liberal hegemony. This is all about liberal hegemony. It's all about American foreign policy during the unipolar moment. Liberal hegemony is all about remaking the world in America's image. That has three dimensions to it. The first of which is to promote liberal democracy across the planet, to go to great lengths to make every country on the planet a liberal democracy, to make it look like the United States of America. So that's the first goal. The second goal is to embed every state, and especially those big states like China and Russia, in that international economic order that the United States was principally responsible for creating during the Cold War. In other words, you want to get everybody hooked on capitalism. You want a lot of economic interdependence in the system. So that's the second goal. Again, the first goal is to promote liberal democracy. Second is to embed countries in the international economic order that Uncle Sugar created during the Cold War. And then the third goal, which is related to the second, is to get countries embedded in international institutions. For example, you want to get China embedded in the World Trade Organization. You want to get Russia into the IMF and the World Bank. You want to get more and more countries into NATO and the European Union, which are international institutions. So these are the three principal goals, and it's easy to understand how a country like the United States would pursue these particular missions. So that's really what liberal hegemony was all about. Is what were the benefits of this? In other words, why was Uncle Sam pushing so hard to remake the world in America's image? Well, we thought there were three major benefits. The first has to do with human rights. As you all know, because Canada is a thoroughly liberal country, much like the United States, liberals care greatly about individual rights. And this is a wonderful thing. It's one of the reasons that I'm very thankful that I was born and raised in liberal America. Okay? So we care about rights, and we believe those rights are inalienable. And what that means is that every person on the planet has those rights, and that we as Americans and we as Canadians care not only about the rights of our fellow Americans or our fellow Canadians, we care about the rights of everybody on the planet. Rights really matter. They're a centerpiece of liberal theory. And the idea here is that if you can create a planet that's filled with nothing but liberal democracies, we will no longer have to worry about massive violations of human rights, because liberal democracies, by definition, privilege individual rights and hardly ever engage in massive violations of those rights. So again, liberal hegemony is holding out the promise of effectively eliminating the problem of massive rights violations. That's the first benefit. What's the second benefit? The second benefit, which all of the students in the audience will know right away, is democratic peace theory. This is the idea that liberal democracies do not fight against each other. Well, if liberal democracies do not fight against each other, which liberal hegemonists believe to the core, I'm sure many Canadians believe to the core. If you believe that, then if you create a planet that has nothing but liberal democracies on it, you have love, peace, and dope. What else can you have? There's going to be no more war. You all know Frank Fukuyama's very famous piece, The End of History, right? The End of History, right, says that what's happening here is that liberal democracy is inexorably spreading all across the planet. And we're eventually going to reach the point, Frank says, where there's nothing but liberal democracies on the planet. And what does he say is then going to be the most formidable problem we face? Boredom. Boredom. Why? Because nobody fights against each other. There are no massive violations of human rights. So you can see where if you have a country like the United States, right, that's a thoroughly liberal country, that it's going to think that spreading liberal democracy is a really good thing because it's going to bring peace to the world and eliminate human rights violations. The third reason that, or the third benefit that we think you're going to get from liberal hegemony is it's going to make the world safe for democracy, for liberal democracy. It's very important to understand that liberal democracies are very skittish about their future. They worry about internal threats and they worry about external threats. When I was a little boy growing up in the United States of America, we, meaning Americans, the American government, worried about communists. We really worried about communists. We worried about the American Communist Party forming an alliance with Moscow. Well, if you have a world where there's nothing but liberal democracies, you don't have to worry about your Communist Party forming an alliance with Moscow because there's no Moscow that's communist that's out there. It's a liberal democracy too. So for the purposes of maintaining your liberal democracy forever and ever, to use Woodrow Wilson's term, for purposes of making the world safe for democracy, what you want is a planet that has nothing but liberal democracies on it. So this was our goal, right? To make the world a place that had nothing but liberal democracies because it would give us these three major benefits. Now, the next question you want to ask yourself is, why didn't we do this in 1980 or in 1920? Why did we do it in the post-Cold War period? Right? Why is liberal hegemony, in my story, peculiar to unipolarity? And there are three factors you want to keep in mind here. First, and this is a general point you should all keep in your frontal lobes over the years moving forward. What's going on in the world today is that the glacis plates are moving. We're going from unipolarity to multipolarity. And when many of us in the room, I'm talking here about the old dogs, when we were young, we grew up in a bipolar world, and the glacis plates shifted in the late 80s, early 90s, and we went from bipolarity to unipolarity. So in my lifetime, we've gone from bipolarity to unipolarity, and we're now going to multipolarity. All of those of you who are trying to make sense of what's going on in the world today, and you can't figure out what's happening, a large part of the story is that the glacis plates are moving, and all sorts of adjustments are being made. There are all sorts of consequences from this. But anyway, we went, when the Cold War ended, from bipolarity to unipolarity. Now, why does this matter for liberal hegemony? The fact is, if you live in a bipolar world, you have the US and the Soviet Union, those two countries are going to behave towards each other in a realist fashion. Balance of power politics is going to dominate relations between the United States and the Soviet Union. But when you move to a unipolar world, you have, by definition, only one great power. So you can no longer have great power politics. All of this is a way of saying that the unipole, or the sole pole, which is the United States of America, does not have to worry about balance of power politics because there are no other great powers in the system. And just to get way ahead of myself, you understand what's happening now is we're moving out of unipolarity to multipolarity, i.e. balance of power politics is coming back. But that's getting way ahead of myself. The point is, in the early 1990s, we were moving squarely into a unipolar world, especially after December 1991 when the Soviet Union went down the toilet bowl, right? So we were in a unipolar world where we did not have to worry about balance of power politics. All of that's another way of saying we were free to pursue an ideological foreign policy in ways we were not free to do before 1989.